This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about what happens when a system designed to enforce rules quietly loses the ability to do so. Not all at once, not dramatically, but incrementally, procedurally, on the record. For a long time, the assumption has been simple, that institutions bend, but eventually they hold, that warnings matter, that orders mean something, that consequences arrive. What happens when they don't? What happens when defiance becomes routine and enforcement becomes optional, and the people tasked with holding the line realize too late that their tools no longer work? Today, something rare happened. Not loud, not emotional, but irreversible. A system acknowledged in writing that it could no longer contain the threat inside its own walls. If you want to understand why this moment changes everything that follows, stay with me. Because what broke here wasn't a rule. It was an assumption, and once that assumption collapses, the next steps are no longer discretionary. They're forced. For years, we've been told this system is driven by people, strong personalities, bad actors, charismatic figures who bend events around themselves. That framing is comforting, because if the problem is a person, the solution is removal. But that's not what's actually in control here. What governs this moment is not willpower or ideology. It's leverage. The quiet arithmetic of power versus enforcement. Courts do not run on force. They run on compliance, on the shared belief that ignoring an order is more dangerous than obeying it. When that balance holds, the system looks strong. When it doesn't, the system looks polite. What you are watching now is the moment when leverage shifted. When one actor accumulated enough insulation, money, influence, attention that traditional consequences stopped working. Not because the rules disappeared, but because the cost of breaking them fell to zero. That's when a legal system stops being a boundary and becomes a suggestion. And once that happens, the problem is no longer legal. It becomes structural, because systems like this don't fail loudly. They fail by being exposed. And exposure forces escalation. There was a time when defiance looked different. It was rare. It was discreet. It happened behind closed doors, through lawyers, in footnotes and filings. Before, when a court issued an order, the conflict moved quietly. Motions, appeals, delays that still acknowledge the court's authority. Now, the defiance is public, performative, reinforced by applause. Orders are violated in real time. Warnings are answered with repetition. Sanctions are treated as background noise. And slowly, almost invisibly, the standard shifted. What once would have ended a case became a talking point. What once would have disqualified a defendant became a strategy. Each violation normalized the next. This is how dangerous change actually happens. Not through a single rupture, but through repetition that trains everyone watching to accept a new baseline. The court responded the way courts always do, incrementally. Escalation by procedure. Another warning, another citation, but slow systems fail against fast defiance. And by the time the imbalance becomes undeniable, the damage is already done. Because now, the question is no longer whether rules were broken. It's whether the system still knows how to respond when breaking them works. And that question is about to collide with reality. Then the quiet balance snapped, not with outrage, with paperwork. A federal judge stopped warning and started documenting. Not one incident, not two, a pattern, 14 violations, each one time-stamped, archived, preserved, orders ignored, witnesses contacted, restrictions treated as optional, warnings answered with repetition. This wasn't chaos. It was consistency. 7 separate hearings, 7 opportunities to stop, each one declined. And then something changed. The court acknowledged formally that its tools no longer worked. That fines didn't deter, that contempt didn't restrain. That compliance could not be compelled from the bench alone. So the judge did something courts almost never do. She escalated out of the system. Not rhetorically, procedurally, a referral filed in open court with evidence attached, no leaks, no commentary, just a conclusion reached under oath. If you think this is about punishment, you're already behind. This was about survival. Because once a court admits it cannot enforce its own orders, the danger isn't the defendant, it's what comes next. And now that admission is no longer sealed inside the judiciary, it's moving. Here's the mechanism most people never see. Courts are not designed to overpower defiance. They are designed to make defiance irrational. The system assumes something simple, that violating an order costs more than obeying it. When that assumption holds, enforcement is almost invisible. When it breaks, everything follows. In this case, the imbalance was structural. Fines became negligible. Public warnings became fuel. Contempt became symbolic. And the damage didn't land on the person defying the court. It landed on the institution trying to restrain him. Every ignored order weakened the bench. Every uncorrected violation signaled permission. Not just to this defendant, but to every future one watching. That's when the court faced a choice it was never meant to make. Continue issuing orders that no longer mattered, or acknowledge the failure and force intervention from outside. The referral wasn't about escalation for its own sake. It was about transferring responsibility to the only body with leverage the court lacked: political consequence, removal power, institutional force. Because once a legal system absorbs all the damage while defiance absorbs none, enforcement doesn't just fail. It reverses. And when that happens, the next crisis is not legal. It's constitutional. Now the pace accelerates. Because once the referral exists, it can't be unseen. Committees move, drafts resurface, vote counts change. What had been hypothetical becomes procedural. What had been delayed becomes mandatory. Support multiplies, quietly at first, then all at once, not because minds changed overnight, because cover appeared. When a judge signs her name to a conclusion like that, neutrality disappears. Defending inaction becomes harder than taking a position. The clock starts ticking. Rules trigger other rules. Fast-track procedures activate. 72 hours. That's not a news cycle. That's a pressure chamber. And outside the building, something else begins to happen. Rhetoric hardens, volume increases, language shifts from grievance to warning. Every statement now matters. Every escalation feeds the record. Security responds accordingly. Barriers rise. Presence multiplies. Because the system remembers what happens when words become movement. And this is the most dangerous phase. When accountability advances and resistance accelerates at the same time. Because once momentum runs in both directions, no one fully controls where it stops. This is the part that reaches you. Not abstractly, not politically, personally. Because when institutions strain like this, the effects don't stay contained in buildings or hearings. They leak into routines, into markets, into schools and commutes and conversations you weren't planning to have. You feel it when uncertainty slows decisions, when employers wait, when investors hesitate, when plans stay tentative because the ground feels unstable. You hear it when children ask questions that don't have clean answers. Why soldiers are visible, why streets are blocked, why adults sound careful. This is what systemic stress looks like at human scale. Not panic, suspension. The quiet awareness that rules you thought were fixed are being tested in real time. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. If enforcement collapses at the top, it teaches lessons all the way down. That consequences are optional. That volume beats process. That pressure replaces restraint. If you want to understand why moments like this matter beyond politics, this is why. Because systems don't just fail leaders. They train citizens, and what they train us to expect next is still being written. Stay with me. This doesn't stop at the water's edge. It never does. When the world's largest economy and most visible democracy enters a constitutional stress test, everyone notices allies don't need briefings. They read the signals, a judiciary escalating outward, a legislature forced into speed, security deployed for domestic political events. That combination reads as instability. Markets respond first. Quietly, capital is cautious by nature. It moves away from uncertainty long before headlines catch up. Adversaries respond differently. They probe. They test boundaries. They watch to see how much attention is consumed internally, because internal distraction is opportunity. This is how domestic strain becomes strategic vulnerability, not through collapse, through bandwidth loss. When leaders are consumed by survival, they have less capacity for deterrence. When institutions turn inward, coordination slows. And the most dangerous part is this: none of it requires failure, only distraction. The system can still function and still bleed influence at the same time. That's why this moment matters beyond any vote or verdict. Because what's unfolding is being observed, evaluated, and priced in, and the world is already adjusting to the possibility that the rules here are less stable than advertised. What comes next determines whether that adjustment becomes permanent. From here, the system has three paths, none of them clean, none of them painless. The first is adjustment. The process absorbs the shock. Accountability moves forward. Institutions reassert boundaries, not through rhetoric, but through consequence. This path is slow, stabilizing, but politically costly. The second is erosion. The system proceeds, but incompletely. Rules are enforced unevenly. Outcomes land, but without finality. The appearance of accountability remains while its deterrent effect weakens. This is the most common outcome historically. And the most corrosive, the third is rupture. Escalation outpaces containment. Parallel processes collide. Legal action, political action, public reaction, all accelerating at once. The system still functions, but under constant stress, improvising instead of governing. None of these paths are theoretical. All are already visible in fragments. What determines which one dominates is not a single vote or decision, it's behavior. What happens when pressure increases? What happens when restraint fails? What happens when enforcement meets resistance at scale? The next hours don't decide everything, but they lock in momentum. And once momentum chooses a direction, systems like this rarely reverse quickly, which means the final outcome isn't about intent. It's about what the structure can still carry. There is a temptation in moments like this to look for closure, a vote, a verdict, a date on the calendar where things settle. That's not how systemic crises end. They don't conclude, they reveal. What this moment has exposed is not just the behavior of one individual or the courage of one institution, but the limits of enforcement in a system built on voluntary compliance. The question now isn't whether accountability exists. It's whether it still works when tested by power that refuses to absorb cost. Nothing that happens next will fully resolve that tension. Even decisive outcomes leave residue, precedents, expectations. Lessons learned by those watching closely. If enforcement succeeds, it will have been forced, not assumed. If it fails, it won't disappear, it will mutate. And the most dangerous part is this: systems don't announce when they stop constraining behavior. They signal it indirectly. Through hesitation, through exception, through accommodation, those signals are being read right now by politicians, by courts, by the public, by actors far beyond these borders. If you want to understand where this goes next, you have to keep watching the structure, not the spectacle. Because whatever path locks in from here will shape what power learns it can get away with. And once that lesson sets, it doesn't unteach easily. Stay engaged. Follow the process. And don't mistake resolution for stability. I'll see you in the next one.